I didn't mean to notice her right away. I was busy wiping grease off my hands, leaning over the counter at my friend's small repair shop, and trying not to fumble with the stack of invoices in front of me. But then she was there, sliding past the open doorway with that quiet confidence that seemed to fill the room without a sound. My friend had left early, muttering something about a meeting downtown, and the place felt unusually empty. She was older, I'd noticed that immediately, though not in a way that made her intimidating. Mid-40s, maybe a little more, with hair streaked just enough with gray to give her a sort of soft authority. She moved like she belonged everywhere, like the space itself adjusted to her presence. I watched, and I caught myself leaning back against the counter, suddenly aware of every detail. The faint perfume, the light rustle of her cardigan, the way her eyes flicked over the scattered tools and paperwork, as if she were cataloging everything at once. "Stay a little longer," she murmured, and it wasn't really a request. More like a gentle nudge, a small intrusion into the silence I'd been clinging to. She settled onto the stool beside me, and the air felt different somehow, heavier and lighter all at once. I swallowed, trying to pretend I wasn't staring at her hands, graceful even as they rested on the worn edge of the counter. She had that ease, the kind that made everything around her seem slower, more deliberate. For a moment, she just watched me adjust a wrench, as if the task mattered less than the quiet between us. I wanted to speak, but the words caught somewhere in my throat. I fumbled with a piece of paper, folding it and refolding it, trying to look busy. And she noticed. There was a tiny smile, barely there, like she'd found something amusing in my awkwardness. That flicker of warmth, so subtle I almost missed it, made my chest tighten in a way I didn't expect. We didn't talk much at first. A pause stretched between us, thick enough to feel almost tangible. I glanced at her sideways, and she didn't look away. Instead, her gaze lingered, like she was seeing something I hadn't even realized I was hiding. The hum of the old fluorescent lights above, the faint scent of motor oil mixed with coffee from the small machine in the corner, the soft creak of the floorboards under her weight. It all seemed to conspire to hold us there, suspended in a moment neither of us fully understood. Then, almost casually, she reached over and adjusted the papers I'd been messing with. Just a small gesture, barely noticeable, but the electricity in that touch made my fingers tingle long after she'd withdrawn them. "I guess that's what friends do," she said softly, and her tone wasn't teasing. It was layered, almost like she was testing me. I laughed a little, more from nerves than humor, and the sound felt loud in the quiet room. She shifted on the stool, just a fraction closer, and I realized I hadn't moved back. Couldn't, maybe. The way she was watching me, that unspoken patience, made it impossible to do anything but stay put. And then she said it again, this time quieter, almost a whisper. "Stay a little longer." I nodded, though I wasn't sure if it was agreement or surrender. But even as I did, I caught myself thinking about it after she looked away, after her presence seemed to fade into the corners of the room. That line, soft as it was, replayed itself over and over in my mind, leaving me unsettled and intrigued in the same breath. I didn't know what was happening. I just knew that for the first time in a long while, I didn't want to leave. I didn't expect to see her again so soon. The afternoon had stretched lazily, the shop smelling faintly of engine oil and old paper, when she walked in with a stack of invoices that looked heavier than she claimed. I offered to help, and she hesitated, just a fraction of a second too long, before sliding a folder across the counter. Her hands were steady, but I noticed the slight tremor in her fingers as she lifted the top envelope. The kind of tremor someone tries hard to hide. She caught my glance and gave a quick, almost imperceptible smile, like she knew I'd seen it but wasn't ready to admit it aloud. "Thanks," she said quietly, her voice carrying that subtle weight, soft but firm, like she wasn't used to letting anyone notice her small cracks. I nodded, picking up the papers. She watched me as I shuffled them, her posture a little stiff, her eyes darting occasionally toward the door as if the world outside demanded attention she didn't want to give. I realized she always seemed a little cautious, like she was holding herself back from letting anything slip. We worked together in silence for a while. I noticed the way her shoulders stiffened when she reached across the counter to grab a stapler. The faint exhale she didn't bother hiding afterward. The quiet rhythm of our interaction made the air between us almost tangible, charged in a way that didn't need words. Then she laughed. It was brief, almost cut off mid-note, and I found myself grinning before I realized it. Something about it wasn't just humor. It was relief, a fragile letting go of something she'd been carrying. I wanted to ask what had been weighing on her, but I didn't. I just watched, quietly, noticing every detail. The soft lines around her eyes, the way her hair caught the light, the way she let herself relax for a moment before tightening again. At one point, she paused, pressing a hand to her temple like she'd forgotten something, or like she was fighting a tide she couldn't name. Her gaze met mine, fleeting and guarded, and I felt an unexpected weight in my chest, like I'd stumbled onto something private without permission. I offered her a reassuring nod, and she allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible exhale, a surrender that felt louder than anything she said. There was a moment, just a breath long, when her hand brushed against mine while passing a pen. Neither of us moved away. The air seemed to hum. I wanted to reach out, to linger, but didn't. She pulled back subtly, but the memory of that touch stayed with me, a quiet spark between us that neither acknowledged out loud. Finally, she gathered the last of the papers, stacking them neatly, but her eyes lingered a second too long on the counter where our hands had met. She smiled then, not quite a full smile, but one that held secrets, something unsaid yet heavy with meaning. "Don't work too hard," she murmured as she turned to leave, her voice low enough that it seemed like a private thing, meant only for me. I watched her go, my fingers brushing over the spot where hers had been. That small, fleeting connection, so brief, so careful, clung to me in a way I couldn't shake. And I realized that whatever this was between us, it wasn't simple. It was complicated, and it had just begun. The storm started just as the shop lights flickered, long shadows stretching across the floor. Rain tapped against the windows in a slow, irregular rhythm, almost like it was listening to us. We were alone again, the day's last customers gone, and the quiet felt heavier than it had before. She leaned over the counter to sort through an invoice, and I found myself unconsciously closing the gap between us, drawn by something I didn't yet have words for. Her scent, faint, warm, slightly floral, hit me in that half second when she glanced up and her eyes caught mine. I could see it there, just beneath the surface, the flicker of hesitation, a trace of thought she didn't voice. I opened my mouth, almost saying something, almost letting the words tumble out, but stopped. The sound of the rain outside filled the space, loud enough to cover my silence. She shifted, brushing a stray strand of hair behind her ear, and my hand twitched. I wanted to reach out, to close the distance, but some small, internal alarm held me back. We weren't supposed to cross this line. Not here, not now. And yet, the closeness of her, the way her hand rested on the counter near mine, made every boundary feel fragile. "I didn't think anyone would stay this late," she said finally, her voice careful, almost casual, but the hesitation at the end betrayed her. I caught the half-smile that didn't reach her eyes, and I realized she was just as aware of the tension as I was. We worked side by side, organizing papers, and I noticed the little things again, the slight tremor in her hands, the faint crease between her brows as she concentrated, the way her shoulder brushed against mine when she moved. It shouldn't have mattered. And yet, it did, and every brush of contact sent a small, confusing jolt through me. A sudden phone buzz startled us both. She glanced at the screen, an unknown number, and I felt the sudden intrusion of the outside world. Her shoulders tightened, her jaw set just slightly. I knew it wasn't me she was thinking about. I didn't ask. I didn't need to. The spell had broken. Still, as the storm raged outside, and the rain painted streaks down the glass, our eyes met again, and something almost happened. I leaned in, just a fraction too close, but she turned her head at the last second, letting the moment pass without acknowledgement. My chest tightened, and I swallowed, forcing my hands back to the counter, forcing my mind to focus on the mundane task of sorting invoices instead of the impossible electricity between us. She gave a small, almost apologetic smile, a whisper of something unspoken, and returned to her work. I could feel her presence like heat lingering in a room after the fire's gone out, and I realized I hadn't breathed properly in what felt like hours. The storm continued, the shop soaked in muted light and shadow, and all I could think about was how close we'd been, and how impossible it was to cross that line without unraveling something neither of us could define yet. And then, in that charged, suspended quiet, my hand brushed hers again, almost deliberately, almost too close. We didn't speak for a long while, not because there wasn't anything to say, but because every word felt like it might tip the fragile balance between us. The shop smelled faintly of rain and oil, the fluorescent lights humming overhead, too steady and too bright, as if they could illuminate every secret we were trying to hide. She leaned against the counter, arms folded, eyes fixed somewhere past me. I wanted to say something, anything, to break the quiet, but the words that came to mind felt clumsy and dangerous. Instead, I just watched. The faint crease between her brows, the tilt of her head, the way her lips pressed together ever so slightly when she exhaled. All of it screamed more than any confession could. Finally, she spoke, quiet but deliberate. "What are we doing?" Her voice was low, but every syllable carried weight. She wasn't asking playfully or teasingly, or even rhetorically. She was asking, and I felt the ground shift beneath me. I opened my mouth and closed it again, because the answer wasn't simple. It wasn't about attraction, or chance, or loneliness. It was something more complicated. Something I couldn't define without unraveling the quiet rhythm we'd fallen into. She shifted, running a hand along the edge of the counter as if she needed to touch something solid to anchor herself. Her eyes found mine for just a heartbeat, and then she looked away. The movement was subtle, but it carried the weight of confession. She was as conflicted as I was. I don't know," I admitted, my voice barely above the hum of the lights. I can't stop thinking." The words sounded foolish even to me, but they were true. Too true. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she rested her forehead against the counter, and I could see the tension in her shoulders, the small, invisible weight pressing down on her. I wanted to reach out, to offer something. Anything. But something inside me held back, the same thing that had kept us dancing around this invisible line all along. The silence stretched again, thick enough to hold both of us in its grip. Every small noise, the faint drip of water from the leaky faucet, the creak of the floor under her weight, the distant rumble of traffic outside, seemed louder than it should be. And still, we didn't speak, because speech might shatter the fragile understanding we had built, a connection too complex for words alone. Finally, she lifted her head, eyes glistening with something I didn't want to name. "I'm tired of pretending," she whispered. It wasn't directed at me, exactly. It wasn't angry or accusatory. It was raw, brittle, and impossibly human. I felt my chest tighten, my stomach knot. I wanted to ask what she meant, to hold her hand, to stop the weight of the words from crushing us both, but I stayed silent. She exhaled slowly, as if letting go of something she had carried for too long, and said the line that would echo in my mind long after she'd left. "I don't think I can do this anymore, whatever this is." And in that moment, with the quiet pressing down and her words lingering in the air, I realized we had crossed a threshold neither of us could undo, and I didn't know if we'd survive the fallout. I hadn't expected her to laugh so quietly, the sound almost swallowed by the hum of the air conditioner. She had a folder in her hands, one she hadn't meant to show me, or maybe she had, and I was just slow enough to notice. I leaned over as she opened it, careful not to invade her space, and my eyes caught a photograph tucked inside, a younger version of her, smiling with a man I didn't recognize. There was a tenderness there, a kind of light I'd never seen in her now. She caught me staring and didn't look away. "I never thought anyone would care to see this," she said, voice soft, a little bitter, a little sad. He was important. Once. I nodded slowly, not knowing exactly what to say. There was no rush to fill the silence. Instead, I just let my gaze linger on her, noticing the way her shoulders slumped ever so slightly, the faint line between her brows that appeared when she tried not to remember too much. I thought I could forget him, she admitted, flipping the photo to show me the back where a date was scribbled in faded ink. But it doesn't work that way. You don't just erase someone. Her hands trembled just a little, and I noticed the subtle movement, the way she gripped the edge of the folder, knuckles whitening. I wanted to say something comforting, something that could bridge the space between the past and now. But I didn't. Instead, I spoke the first thing that came to mind, something quiet, almost a whisper. He would have noticed you, though. He'd have seen all of it. Her eyes met mine, wide, and I saw the flash of emotion she tried to hide. Gratitude? Surprise? Something heavier, impossible to label. She looked down at the photo again, and the corner of her lip trembled. For the first time, she didn't hide anything. The weight of her past, her heartbreak, the pieces she carried silently. It was all there, palpable in the room between us. She let out a slow sigh, almost a laugh, almost a sob. You make it sound like I was lovable. It wasn't a question, just a quiet statement of disbelief, and it struck me how guarded she always seemed, how carefully she'd shielded herself. I stayed still, watching her, noticing every micro-movement, the way her hair fell across her face, the faint crease at the corner of her eyes, the barely audible shift in her breath. The photograph had changed everything without her saying it outright. It was a bridge between who she had been and the version of herself I was seeing now. Vulnerable, unguarded, human in a way that left me unsettled and utterly attentive. She closed the folder slowly, but didn't put it away. Instead, she rested it on the counter between us, like a quiet offering. I guess some things never really leave you, she murmured, her voice so low I had to lean closer to catch it. I nodded without speaking. I didn't need to. The room felt heavier, charged with something unspoken, a soft tremor beneath the surface that neither of us could name yet. And then, in that pause, just a fraction of a heartbeat too long, I felt it. The subtle shift, a seismic moment of connection that had nothing to do with romance, yet everything to do with the fragile, human pulse of shared truth. She glanced at me, and for a second, the storm outside didn't matter. Neither did the past. Only the weight of what we had just shared hung in the air between us, and I couldn't look away. The shop smelled faintly of coffee and rain-soaked asphalt, the day quiet except for the occasional drip from the leaky faucet. We didn't speak at first, just moved around the counter, sorting papers and tools as if our hands could do the talking where words might fail. I noticed how she let herself relax this time, shoulders softer, movements less guarded. The tension that had always hovered around her seemed to have eased slightly, replaced by something quieter, something fragile but steady. I wanted to say something monumental, to capture the truth in words, but I didn't. I realized we didn't need to. At one point, I reached for a stack of invoices and our hands brushed. It was casual, accidental, or at least we pretended it was. I felt the warmth of her skin, the subtle pressure of her fingers lingering just a fraction too long, and I didn't pull away. Neither did she. She glanced up, eyes meeting mine, and there was a softness there that hadn't been before. No words, no confessions, just a shared recognition of everything we'd felt and yet couldn't fully name. I realized, with that quiet glance, that we had already crossed a line neither of us could deny. But neither of us had rushed it, because it didn't need rushing. We worked in silence for a few minutes longer, and the mundane rhythm of organizing invoices and wiping down counters felt intimate in a way nothing else could have. I noticed her fingers tracing the edge of a folder as if grounding herself, the way she hummed softly to herself without realizing I was listening, the small tremor in her hand when she set a stapler down. Eventually, she slid a chair closer to mine, not speaking, not announcing anything, just sharing the space. I sat, and somehow it felt inevitable, like we had always belonged here together, in this quiet, ordinary moment. Our hands touched again, more deliberately this time, resting side by side on the counter. I felt the warmth of her, the pulse of subtle trust, and a quiet acceptance washed over both of us. It wasn't fireworks or declarations. It was something more human, more earned. The recognition that we had found each other in the smallest gestures, in the pauses and silences, in the vulnerability neither of us had spoken aloud. She tilted her head slightly toward me, forehead almost brushing mine, just close enough that I could feel the warmth radiating off her skin. My own hand twitched instinctively, but I held it still, letting her take the lead in this unspoken conversation. There was no rush, no need. The shop was quiet, the storm outside having passed, leaving a soft drizzle that streaked the windows. In that light, in that simple, shared space, everything felt settled. Not perfect, not complete, but whole in the only way that mattered. Honest, patient, human. She exhaled softly, resting her forehead just a little more firmly, and I didn't move. I couldn't, and I didn't want to. We stayed like that, side by side, in silence that said more than any words ever could. And somehow that was enough. I think about that afternoon often, the quiet hum of the shop, the way the rain had softened everything outside, and how impossible it all had seemed at the time. It wasn't about fireworks or sudden declarations. It was about noticing the small things, the moments no one else would see, the weight of shared silence that said more than any words ever could. She changed, in ways subtle but undeniable. The guarded edge she carried softened, just enough to let someone else in. Not completely, not easily, but in a way that mattered. And I changed too. I learned to slow down, to watch, to listen, to realize that connection doesn't always announce itself with drama. Sometimes it arrives quietly, in the spaces between the ordinary. We didn't rush. We didn't force the moment. We learned that love, at least the kind that lasts, isn't always about grand gestures. It's in the patience, the attention, the willingness to sit with someone without needing to define it immediately. I learned to see her, really see her, and she learned, I think, to trust that seeing someone doesn't always have to hurt. I still remember the first time we allowed ourselves to sit side by side. No words, no expectations. Her hand brushing mine, the faint warmth lingering long after we parted. The way her presence could fill the room without any attempt at claiming it. Those small, human moments became the backbone of something steady, something real. And looking back, I realized that what we had wasn't perfect. There were awkward pauses, moments of doubt, and times when the past threatened to overshadow the present. But the beauty was in navigating all of it together. Hesitation, laughter, silence, and all. It taught me something simple and terrifying. That love doesn't have to be instant or clean to matter. It doesn't have to make sense in the world's eyes, only in the quiet places between us. It's earned. It's patient. It's human. Now, when I remember those afternoons, I feel a warmth that isn't loud, but steady. A reminder that connection can arrive when you least expect it, in ways that shake you gently, without warning, and linger far longer than you imagine. And sometimes, late at night, I find myself smiling at the memory of her gaze, her faint laugh, the way she shifted ever so slightly closer, as if the world outside could wait. That's the part that stays with me. The quiet afterglow of something neither of us rushed, but both of us learned to hold. If this story made you feel something, let me know in the comments. Would you want more stories like this?